Hello, welcome to the Reset with Renee podcast. I'm Renee Fleming, and I'm here with Jennifer Parker, author of this fantastic book, Coercive Relationships. And as you can see, my copy is dog-eared and highlighted, and there's so much good stuff in this book that I can't wait to hear Jennifer comment on. So I want to welcome you, Jennifer, and I hope you know how much I appreciate you taking time to talk with me and share your experience with our listeners. Welcome.
I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Excited to have this conversation. And I love, by the way, I love your title, Reset with Renee. We all need to reset at times.
Yes, daily, hourly, minutes sometimes. Yes. Thank you for that. Well, I'd love if you could start with just sharing with the audience a little bit about your experience and background and how you got to the point where you wrote this magnificent book.
I would love to. So I like to say that how I became, when I first learned about domestic violence, quote unquote, learned, I was going through the crisis of a divorce myself, and I decided that I needed to brush up on my bachelor's in psychology that I had, because I hadn't done that much work with it. And I did an internship, and lo and behold, it was in a battered women's shelter called the Northwoods Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So as I said, I didn't think that I knew anything about it. And my eyes, it was during a big period of growth for me anyway. And my eyes were really opened. And what really surprised me was that how much I identified with the people that I was working with. And I say, quote unquote, that I was learning because actually I experienced, there was what I would call some domestic abuse in my family of origin, but we didn't call it that then, did we? It's like a lot of things were just considered normal, that, you know, male partners would be dominant over a woman in such a way that even, you know, that things would happen that now we would definitely call abuse. So that's, my eyes were really opened, and I really became passionate about not only intimate partner abuse, but also how those kinds of behaviors infiltrate throughout our society, permeate. And so I really got interested in looking at power and how it's used, and that ultimately led me to graduate school, where I became a therapist. I received a master's in social work, and then and I specifically went to a school that would give me a specialty also in doing intimate partner abuse. So I had a practicum in that. And I worked with both abusers and with victims, and a little bit with children. And then ultimately, when I did my own practice, I just specialized in working with victims, and developed a curriculum and so forth. So that's my story.
So you have been doing this work a long time.
Over 35 years, yes.
Well, it's evident in the book that you wrote. I know when we've talked previously, one of the things I appreciate cognitively is just the content, you know, the depth and breadth of it. But also, you know, I shared with the gentle nature that comes through as someone who's experienced that myself, and thinking about other people that I work with and speak with, that gentle empathy that comes through, so invaluable. So
I'm so glad that you say that, because I really wanted that to be the case, because I know, having worked with many people over time, the issues that come up and how they feel beaten down, and how things can come across, and how hard they can be on themselves. So I really wanted that to keep coming through. It's like, you know, be gentle, be patient, step by step. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to jump into the next question, which is really about differentiating power and empowerment, because I think that's something that can be tricky. I know for myself, places I've gotten hung up before is giving someone the benefit of the doubt too many times from a place of, from a good intention, right? So so I would love if you could talk a little bit about the difference between powering over versus living from an empowered place.
I would love to.
Right.
Power is something that oftentimes people who have been victimized are very uncomfortable with if you start to talk to them about that.
Absolutely.
Because they've experienced so much of the power over, domination. And if you think about it in intimate relationships, they're really not supposed to come. They're supposed to be more of an equal thing. You know, sometimes one person gets their way, sometimes another's, but it's a cooperative, mutual, you know, never just so one-sided in healthy relationships. So with power over relationships, when you've experienced that a lot, then sometimes if somebody mentions power or even like assertiveness, it gets translated as more aggression because of their past experiences. And also, by the way, because often their partners are telling them when they are the least bit assertive that they're being aggressive. Mm-hmm. Because they're not getting their way, they interpret it as aggression. So, yeah. So empowerment really is about power within, believing in yourself, knowing what your thoughts and feelings are, being able to weigh, you know, someone else's perspective with your own, rather than just automatically have it being dominated or believing someone else, but being able to weigh those things. And it's interesting because I'm actually doing a series in my blog on empowerment. And I'm just about to publish the second of that series, but I talk about that in terms of, first of all, the very first thing, in order to be empowered when it comes to this, is you have to know what's going on. And oftentimes people are confused. They love the person, they can't, and they've had good experiences with the person, and it's really confusing and hard to believe that someone would want to harm you and what's going on. So it's important to be able to name it, first of all. What is this that's going on? And what permits this person to do this in terms of what their belief system is? Because I love that you brought up giving people second chances. It's a healthy thing in any relationship to be able to give a second chance, mm-hmm. but only if that's mutual and only if it's not time after time. Yeah. And because that's healthy in intimate relationships, sometimes we can get pulled into doing it too often, and particularly because we're hearing, oh, you're not doing things right, you're wrong, you're stupid. I mean, whatever the abuser might be saying. So.
Absolutely. That sense of self gets chipped at, where you begin to lose touch with what your reality is over time. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I really hear kind of coming back to the truth of what you know, what you feel, what you believe, and not losing that outside of your own boundaries within that relationship.
And knowing how to come back, like how to ground or center yourself in that, because you can get, it's normal to get pulled off by, you know, if you're experiencing coercive control. So being able to do that, that's kind of the second step. So anyway.
No, I love that.
I encourage people to subscribe to my blog if they want to know more detail about all of that.
Absolutely. And I think empowerment is a great topic for anybody. I was listening to a podcast while I had lunch talking about some recovery issues. And, you know, that was the thing, moving from victim. This is the experience. This is the pain, the trauma too. Empowerment, recovering, becoming what you're supposed, who you are, who you're supposed to be, that developmental process. So yeah, that's great.
Can I jump in and just say something about the whole term victim? Because that culturally has a bad name. And oftentimes people really don't want to say that they're a victim. They say, I'm not a victim. So I'd like to point out that being a victim doesn't mean anything about you. It means that you've been victimized by someone else. And that has predictable results that, you know, we can go into more later. But, you know, what you want to do is you don't want to stay there, but you want to move into more survivor and even thriver, right?
Yes.
But it doesn't mean, I don't like to say, victim isn't who you are. It means you've been victimized.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you emphasized that. I've definitely seen the struggle with that as well. And then also circling back to something else you said that jumped out to me was having the awareness, I think oftentimes is so critical before you even change your behavior.
Definitely.
In context.
The awareness. That's what the naming is all about.
Yeah. Yes, good stuff. I like that. Okay, so my next question is, what would you like for people to understand about their role when they are in, they're a friend perhaps or relative, they're in a bystander position where they're seeing someone they care about in a relationship where there's power and control issues. And it could be not family or friends, it could be another context, work or school or whatever. But I think that's a really tricky place to be for everybody. And so I'm really curious to hear your perspective on what you would say to that subgroup of people.
And I think that one of the big reasons why it feels so tricky is we've been, there's been this overarching thing. It's like, this is a private matter and, you want to jump in. And I do think it is something to be careful about. However, it is important. So first of all, if you're approaching, let's say it's a friend, or a family member, if you're approaching someone, to really maintain an attitude of non-judgmental. You can be, judge the behavior, but not the person, because depending upon where that person is, that person could just get defensive about it because they might not be in a place where they're ready to leave. And so often people who are concerned will leap into that, oh, you need to leave. And that's a process for any of us, whether there's abuse going on or not.
Yes.
And so being non-judgmental, concerned, compassionate, not jumping into trying to fix anything, but showing them that you're somebody who can listen to wherever they are. So I'll give one example of maybe there's somebody who's not ready to divulge it, but you're picking up on something that, gee, you just witnessed something between that person and their partner that obviously you're concerned about. And you might just say, that felt really abusive, or, whatever language you would want to use, or that, I'm wondering, how did that affect you? Yeah. Trying to seek out some information and how much they might want to talk about it. And just to say, and if they said, oh, they sort of shrug it off, to just say, well, I would never want to be that friend who communicated that somehow it wasn't okay to talk about anything. So that's why I said something. Anytime you want to talk, that'd be great.
Love that phrase. Yes, I would never want that person that wouldn't create the safe space to talk about, to have
that. Is so important just for you to be there, just to create that space. So you're recognizing it and you're communicating the message about the behavior being inappropriate. Mm-hmm. Okay, not about the person, but about the behavior, because that may be something that is a gradual recognition on their part, so that maybe later on they'll want to come back and talk about it. And the same thing is true for people that we don't know personally. Like, for instance, if you work in an office with somebody, or if it's somebody who's a doctor and they're seeing, that person may not be ready yet to divulge, but when you open the door to being able to talk about it, then they can come back to that. And you're delivering that message that this is not normal. Otherwise, when people ignore it, it's too easy for people to then think, well, I guess I'm making a big deal out of nothing. Or, I guess I'm not important, or whatever the case might be that they might personalize.
Yes, the second guessing that often comes with the victimization process. Yes, absolutely. So I appreciate that you mentioned the privacy factor, and then the reticence. That's, both of those pieces are important. And then I'm also thinking about situations where it may not be as personal, it might be social or in other systems where people don't want to be involved. They may be actually siding on the person who's exercising power and control. So that's one of those things I think about. And I don't know, do you have any further comments on that? I wonder, on that sort of bystander effect.
Well, I was just thinking I should speak too. So perhaps maybe you've got a neighbor and they're close enough that you hear something going on.
Yeah.
That might be an opportunity where you might want to weigh, approaching it more cautiously with the person later, not in front of them. But if there is something where it's obvious there's physical abuse going on, I encourage calling the police, because the victim might not want that. Even if the victim doesn't want that, it's still sending that message, and it's opening the door to that other person being accountable, and it could be part of their journey. So I think that, again, it's sending the message that, no, this kind of behavior isn't okay, because the person who's being abusive is justifying it and minimizing it, and
Yes. Okay, great.
But it is a tricky thing. And particularly, I know sometimes people can fear that maybe they're going to be drawn into something, that they're going to be in danger. So, I can't give a one size doesn't fit all, but I will say that to my knowledge, in most cases, the police can just say they've gotten an anonymous call. So,
okay.
Or
yes.
You could check it out ahead of time and say, can this be anonymous?
Yes, I appreciate that. Yes, reporting or calling the police and those sorts of, even for folks like myself and yourself, mandated reporters, it's never fun, but certainly for someone who's not used to that, yeah, it's uncomfortable for sure. Yeah, great, thank you. So here's the next question, is one I'm really excited to ask you. And it's because I think anyone who would pick up this book perhaps has maybe had a personal experience of a coercive relationship and may be drawn to it. But I think there's so many people who might see that title and think, that has nothing to do with me. Why would I be interested or engage this material? And so, Jennifer, could you speak to, if someone doesn't identify as a victim or survivor, how would reading your book be helpful?
Okay, I'd love to. Well, first of all, just because of what we were just talking about, if you have a friend or a family member, it can be really helpful in terms of understanding what they experience, particularly if that other person isn't necessarily ready to talk about it that much. And I wrote it from the sense, a sense of, I sort of use a lot of you and we and that kind of thing, but I did that intentionally. Even if you are not a victim, kind of gets you inside of what they might be experiencing.
Yes.
But the second big reason is that in the book, I talk about the domination beliefs that pervade our society that permit all kinds of abuse and racial discrimination, persecution, religious, and you can have workplace mobbing, they usually call it in the workplace, or bullying and school bullying, all of that. And it's all related, because there are 4 basic assumptions that in my research that I thought really spoke to this. One is that power is finite. There's only so much power, so therefore I have to protect my power, and I have to be jealous of power. So if you're successful, Renee, in what you're doing, that if I believe that it was finite, it's like, well, that says something about me. I'm not as successful. No, that's not true. So you can see how that plays out in an intimate relationship. And then there's that power comes from power over, sort of what we spoke about before, rather than power within, and with that, rather than the concept of shared power and power with people. And so that is more of a partnership. I'm saying what the partnership beliefs are as well.
Yes.
And then that diversity of opinion, of thoughts, of actions, doing things differently, somehow is threatening. As opposed to diversity is really a good thing, that it really enriches ourselves. It can enrich our relationships if we're not threatened by it. Enriches our society. And then the last one, kind of all of them feed into this, is some people are more worthy than others, rather than everyone has inherent worth and dignity. So all of those kind of 4 assumptions really play into why we have racial discrimination. It's like why we get so polarized about different things, why it's so hard to listen to somebody with a different opinion. If you want to apply it to sort of the political things. So we really all need more practice at just being able to listen and communicate effectively. But anyway, did I answer your question?
You did a fantastic job answering that question. Yes, I mean, each piece I want to story tell and tell you all the things that I could relate to that. But I think the general summary is probably pretty helpful for people. I will say some of the podcasts that I've been listening to have been talking about colonization and patriarchy, capitalism, and how all of the power over structures then play out through our various systems, right? So
domination assumptions definitely do play out in terms of patriarchy and so forth. But it's not just that. You know, it used to be, back when I first got involved in intimate partner abuse, we're really focused on male against female.
yes.
And it is true in heterosexual relationships, it is primarily male against female, but it can be the other way too. And so we have to acknowledge there are male victims. And then of course there's same-sex relationships. We began to look at that. So if it's two women, you wouldn't think that would be going on. Yes, women can also believe in those same kinds of domination sort of beliefs I talk about. So
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because a few of the men that I have spoken with, you know, when you do the research and reading on that, you see there's a nuance to that as well. I mean, the men calling the police to report against a female is probably not going to go so well, or at least that's their prediction. So, so I'm glad you mentioned that there's different nuances with the differences in couples. And
there can be less believing by other people. And part of that is also caution. And I know that I have that as a professional too, because those who have used abuse have frequently turned the tables and claimed the other person is abusive. So you really need some training in order to be able to navigate who, you know, what's truth there. But it is also true that because of their socialization, just like for women, certain things are harder, like being assertive and so forth, if you have a more traditional socialization. For males, it's like they're supposed to be strong and independent, and, you know, it's really hard for them to acknowledge that they've been abused. So, because it says something, they think it says something about being masculine, about being a man, when actually it doesn't. Just as I said earlier, it's not about you. It's not a reflection. I didn't say it in exactly these words, but it's not a reflection on you, the abuse. It's that person is victimizing you. So,
yes.
And once it starts in an intimate relationship, we're particularly vulnerable. I mean, that's what intimacy is all about. Like, we're vulnerable with one another. So therefore, if somebody starts to do that and we give them a second chance, you know, it begins to erode our self-esteem. We start to second guess ourselves and so forth. Or, you know, and if it's physical, I really am realizing that I'm tending to talk more about the emotional abuse and so forth. And part of that is strategic, because people discount the emotional, have discounted the emotional too much in our society.
Yes.
And everyone I've worked with has acknowledged that it is the most difficult, barring lethal violence. Okay. Not that physical abuse isn't also very, very, you know, it has an emotional effect on you actually, but that all these other pieces of the types of emotional abuse, of which I have 10 of in my coercive control checklist, really cause self-doubt. They cause you to, they can lead to depression, to anxiety, hypervigilant, you know, we want to avoid pain, right?
Yes. Well, I think I'm glad you differentiated that, because to your point, I do think most people think intimate partner violence is, you know, domestic violence equals physical harm. And, you know, as I was thinking about our conversation today, I'm drafting a blog right now too, looking at generational differences with mental health and various other issues. But, you know, I was thinking about me, I'm 48, Gen X. I remember being way too young to have watched The Burning Bed, for instance, with Farrah Fawcett. I don't know if anyone would have seen that, but just the shift that has happened during my lifetime. as a Gen Xer, we didn't really have the terminology or the awareness to put to these power dynamics that we're talking about. And so bring it full circle, when you were talking about the difference, that's such a piece of what I see with clients that I work with, the emotional abuse, the emotional neglect that is often invisible to outsiders, which then is more isolating and more shame-inducing and more confusing until someone can have the awareness of what that is and what's happening now and how to heal that.
And it's also harder to prove.
Yes.
If you're to do that, you know, during a divorce or whatever, or just talking with somebody. Yeah, it's harder.
Yes, good point. Yes, there's a Facebook page I follow. It's called The Second Wound. And I love the message of that. What happens when you have that victimization and it's not understood, it's not seen, it's not validated. That's the next level of hurt often. Yes.
Definitely.
So I'm glad you're speaking to both. That's really good stuff. Okay, so my follow-up question then would be, Jennifer, what would you like for people to better understand about the covert tactics of coercive control? And I mean, it kind of ties into that emotional abuse and neglect piece for me. But I can share, you know, with you in the audience, I had a experience of an abusive boss at work, and the tactics were exactly that, not detectable unless you were on the inside. So I would love to hear from your perspective a little bit more about the covert tactics that people experience.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, that it is really, you know, if you're listening to someone and they're talking about, first of all, they might not identify that they're being abused if they're experiencing emotional and not a physical.
Yes.
But they often, because of the trauma of what they've been through and the effects of it, may have trouble articulating it as well. It's important when somebody is opening up and talking about how they're being harmed to just be curious and to listen. And to notice if you're having doubtful questions, you know, to notice that, but to not necessarily communicate that, because it's unfortunately it can come up, and some of that is good. And that, you know, are you talking to someone who is actually saying, like, for instance, I used to work with somebody who did abuser treatment. We had kind of twin programs, and when he would ask, well, are you afraid of your partner, to those people, they would oftentimes say yes. But then when we would ask them why they were afraid, well, that she's going to leave me, or, you know, something else like that. But it was not the same depth of fear. So it's important to be careful to really understand that the emotional fear that comes up from the threats and the intimidation and the negation, you know, negating everything, putting you down constantly, all of that is very real. The other thing I want to say is the term gaslighting is frequently very appropriate to use. And that is, again, unless you're on the inside, unless you're there while it's going on, and even sometimes if you did witness just a little bit, if you don't know the whole context, then you might not catch it. So I think it's important to educate ourselves about gaslighting. And of course, that comes from a movie, a really old movie. I watched it again just recently. That's where the term comes from. So go look at that movie. But it's essentially it's turning things around, making people feel like they're crazy for what they say, what they do. You know, it comes from twisting facts, from denying that things are going on. You know, things like in this movie, he was tampering with the lights, unbeknownst to the woman. But then when she would say something, I said, "What are you talking about? Nothing's going on." You know. It's
denying
really
reality and
mm,
confusion, creating more self-doubt.
yeah. So all
Yeah.
of that creates self-doubt, which I see as an emotional, as a mental injury, because that if you doubt yourself, you've really lost any ability to be empowered.
Mhm.
Okay, and so that's why it's so important for other people to be able to um, give them other kinds of feedback.
Yes.
It's like,
Ab-
oh, what's going on? Oh, that's not normal. Or, ooh, ouch, that would hurt if somebody said that to me.
Yes.
Kinds of
To
things.
mirror and reflect back the the reality. Absolutely. Right. Um, okay. And then one piece I really appreciated about the structure of your book at the end, I guess it's part 8. How do I go forward?
Mhm.
I loved how you divided that up. I wrote down germination, fertilization, or fertilizers, transplanting, grieving, nurturing, and then growth. So just invite you to share a little bit about your thoughts on that
On
process.
each of those, yeah. Well, I just thought it was a really good metaphor. And in my reading and research, germination is about, oftentimes victims will, people who have been victimized will really put themselves down because why did I let this go on so long? Why did I not see it before? Or why has it been so hard for me to leave? And the truth of the matter is, in an intimate relationship, it is hard. And it often takes a few tries or, many efforts before they are ready to leave, if that is indeed the solution that they decide on. So I really like the concept of dormancy and to think about those early stages. And in terms of growth, um, or in terms of decision making, they talk about contemplation. There's pre-contemplation where you're not even aware there's an issue. And then there's contemplation where it's like, whoa, what's going on here? And maybe you're doing some research. Oftentimes people, when they came to me, have already read books, such as mine or others, and or getting some researching online. So that's all part of contemplation. And that is a vital, important part of empowering yourself. Okay. So the germination process, you don't want to downplay that. And I think that really, if formulating it into something that's actually positive, it's like, yeah, it's painful. It's hard to go through, but that's part of you have to do that that dormancy period and before you can get to preparation, before you can get to any decision making. Okay. And then fertilizers. Oh, some of the fertilizers I talked about, definitely the biggest and first one is safety. And I don't mean just physical safety, although certainly that, but emotional safety. So many times people, they get harassed. It's like maybe they're kept up late all night. Or, it's like when the abusive person gets angry, it's like it goes on for hours and hours. And that's really hard. And so figuring out some safety strategies, because we really can't think clearly if we need to be in survival mode, right? Which is what that. So, figuring out safety, maybe having, whether that's through a therapist or an advocate at a domestic violence program, having a safety plan about what you can do when you can see that things are about to go south. And not that we can always avoid things. I don't want to deliver that message. So now I'm a failure because I didn't avoid that. No. But you can pick up some strategies that can hopefully minimize that. And then other fertilizer things, certainly reaching out, having contacts. If you're isolated, which frequently is the case, for two reasons. One, sometimes the abusive person isolates you, doesn't want you to have contact with family and friends, doesn't want you to get any other kind of input. But the other one is frequently out of embarrassment or shame, people will isolate themselves because they're, yeah. So it's like we really do need not just children. When we're raising children, we all need a village of support. And so finding supportive people, if one person doesn't turn out to be very understanding or supportive, keep looking, kind of thing. Sometimes for some people, given maybe their family circumstances, maybe they're so isolated from friends, sometimes it's a professional that becomes the first person that they reach out to. But that's a very important thing.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned all that. And as you were speaking, Jennifer, one of the things that went through my mind, which you talk about in the book, and I appreciate, is the leaving process, if that's the choice you land on, really honoring your inner knowing. And I'm sure you can say even more on this, but just that I've seen it over time. The person in that relationship or situation is the expert
Yes.
on what is likely to happen or not happen, and that leaving can make things worse across the board.
Well, that's the most dangerous time for many people. Yeah. So it's important, that preparation phase is so important. It's like, what, working out the safety. When do you want to, if that's the case? But yes, so there was fertilizer and then transplanting. What I included with that is maybe that's looking at, it could be asking your partner to change and saying, you need to do this or I am out. And sometimes I've seen people go into abuser treatment programs and they really do make the effort to change. It's not a promise though. So some people just learn to become better abusers, or they don't really make changes that stick. So it's important, again, to pay attention to what you know. And I have something called the accountability clues that really helps people to look at, are they changing or not? But anyway, that's one path that's very legitimate. And another path is certainly that, no, this isn't going to work and I need to leave. And by the way, when people are in treatment, and it needs to be specifically addressing the power and control issues in a relationship, not anger management.
You said that.
That's very different.
Thank you. Yes.
That's very different.
Can you say a little bit more about that for listeners?
Well, anger management, not that there's anything wrong with anger management. It teaches you techniques like to observe your thoughts, the thoughts and so forth that are going into how you express your anger. And then it teaches you also assertive ways to express your anger rather than aggressive ones.
Yes.
And so that is a piece of what is done in abuser treatment programs, but it's not the whole thing, because of the beliefs that they have, that they are entitled to be in control. So those need to get addressed. That whole, power comes from power over, all of that kind of thing. So that's the difference. It's like you need to be taking that seriously, and and that's also another reason why couples therapy generally is not a good idea.
Yes.
Frequently, people who are being victimized do think that's the first thing they want to turn to. But unfortunately, most couples therapists are geared towards it being an even playing field, not over one person having more power than the other. And if they don't get that that's going on, and frequently victims don't feel free to be able to express that because it wouldn't feel safe to them, then the couples therapy is just not going to work. There is an exception. There are some abuser treatment programs that utilize couples therapy at certain points, but they are coming at it knowing, okay, there's this power over thing that we're working with. So, yeah.
Yes. And I'd add to that too. I think sometimes, often, not always, the person who's abusive is skillful enough to be charming.
Oh, yeah.
In those situations, which, and if those are often the folks who don't voluntarily go to therapy. So I don't think oftentimes therapists have a whole lot of specific experience with recognizing what that is. And that's how I think certainly some of my clients, when they work with folks in the past, other providers have had that experience. And I've probably done it myself before I became more aware as a provider, missing some of those cues. So I think that's why I'm emphasizing it here at this point in the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Being able to pick up on it.
Yes. Great. Anything more that you could share or would like to say about that part 8? I know we jumped on a couple tangents.
Grieving is so important, just to acknowledge that. And you know, when you're in the midst of constant abuse, power and control efforts, when you're feeling hypervigilant all the time, there's no space for grieving. Okay. I mean, you may feel sad, not that you don't do it at all, but oftentimes people don't in that position aren't able to grieve. And then when they are, if they're making efforts to get out, or if their partners are in treatment and then they're grieving, frequently people don't know how to handle it. It's like, well, why are you sad? Why? But they need to process. It's like we all need to do that in order to move on. So I really make a point of telling therapists that I train that it's important to be able to talk with them about that it's just a normal part and it takes time. It's kind of like I just had ankle surgery not too long ago, and I have to give myself time to recover. Well, the same thing here. So that means if you're still in the relationship and you're working on having a more equal relationship, one of the signs that they are changing is that they're able to hear how they hurt you. They're able to hear that. Not that, so when things come up that are like triggers for you, it's like, oh, is this, or maybe just something as might seemingly be innocuous as from getting angry. And in the past, anger has been attached to aggression. And so it can become a trigger that even though they're not being aggressive, so to be able to talk through that in a non-blaming kind of way, for them to be able to hear and acknowledge, and I'm so sorry that I did this, that is a sign of change. So the grief process is really important. Sometimes when people try to talk to their family or friends, if they've left, it's like, well, why aren't you just feeling great about this? Well,
Yes.
hey, when any relationship ends, even if it's of your choice and it's positive in the long run, you still have grief. And so it's okay.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I was having a conversation with someone about grief earlier this week, and a different set of circumstances, but that person had been in survival mode across so many different aspects of the world. And now, several years later, safe enough to grieve. And I really don't think our society is comfortable with grief, period. So what you said, I really heard as delayed and disenfranchised and perhaps complicated grief for a lot of people really deserves to be honored.
And one response sometimes can be also, it's like, well, if I'm feeling this amount, did I make a mistake? It's not a sign of a mistake. Not a sign of a mistake. It's just you need to allow yourself those feelings. And grieving is not just about sadness, but it's also about anger. The stages.
Yes.
Sometimes it's about bargaining. Well, maybe if I did this, it'd be better. So
Yes.
we all need to allow ourselves that process.
Absolutely. Great. And then kind of getting close to the end of questions, but we connected a couple months ago when I was entering podcast world and you were entering promotion of the book world. And so I'm curious, as you've been promoting, have you gotten any surprising or interesting or unexpected feedback along the way?
The only thing that I can think of is during my last workshop that I did, someone said that, mentioned when I was talking about the coercive control checklist, mentioned that I'd left out gaslighting, and I was really puzzled by that. And I think I did okay in terms of it, but basically I thought, I haven't left out gaslighting. I didn't, in my coercive control checklist, that isn't a specific thing, but I do mention it in there. And there are so many of the types, I named them for how they affect people, the different types. And there's so many of them that cause self-doubt and so forth, and that are gaslighting tactics that this particular person hadn't actually looked at that coercive control checklist. So I think that's why she said that. But definitely, coercive control definitely includes gaslighting.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I'm thinking, I couldn't tell you what page, but I'm sure you did, because I think I was putting it in a video I did after the last conversation we had. So,
Right.
yes.
I think it had to do, oh, I know. She brought it up during my definition of coercive control, which I took from, now I can't think of his name, but anyway, there's a book called Coercive Control, and he was the person who came up with that term, which I really like, coercive control. We didn't talk about that. But one of the things is we have to be attuned to what people are ready to talk about. They may talk about their partners being controlling. They might talk about them being abusive, but if they're not ready to use those terms. So it can be domestic violence. It can be domestic abuse. But coercive control really gets at not just the physical, but the emotional. I really like how that really terms it. And it separates it out from controlling behavior. When you use that, it can get confused with maybe you feel the need to be in control because of maybe family dynamics you came from, like, oh, I don't like being a passenger in a car. That's different. That's not coercive control. Okay.
Yes, I'm so glad you're mentioning that, because I know that's in the book and that was helpful. But also coercive control, I think, is a good phrase to use across all environments too, not only family, but some of those other places that you talked about in the book as well, different systems.
Right. Work, school, religious institutions, etc. Yeah.
Yes.
Not that they are inherently coercive controlling, but each of those can have individuals in them, or even part of the system that is. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, and then where can people find your book for purchase?
Well, definitely on Amazon. You can order it through Barnes and Noble and wherever you like to buy books. Even if they don't have it in a bookstore, they will order it. And frequently that's what bookstores are doing a lot of today. So definitely that. You can also get it on Kindle if people prefer electronic books. I would like to have an audio version, but I don't yet. I'm kind of looking into that. But yeah, and then they can also follow me on social media if they would like. And I have monthly blogs that I publish. So I think you're going to be including all of those links, right?
I will put all the links for sure in the show notes. But yes, they can find you on social media and purchase the book anywhere books can be purchased, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then that's where they connect with you. Is there anything as we wrap up, Jennifer, that I didn't ask you or wasn't on our list to talk about that you'd like to leave?
I just want everyone to know, whether you've been a victim of coercive control now or in the past, or you've never been, that we all make a difference. And the healing efforts, the growth efforts that people do, all of that makes a difference in terms of making our world a more peaceful, healthy kind of place to live. And I think that happens just one step at a time. So, but I just like to remind, when people are, when I was seeing clients and they would be working on all the different issues that come up, like maybe with their children, maybe with, in their work, it's like it was healing, not just the partner relationship, but healing that they took into the whole of their lives. And so it's really important work that they do. And it's important work that when we all kind of name and face what's going on in other institutions in our society, I think that also adds to tipping the world more towards peace and nonviolence and partnership.
Well said. I like it. Yes, that piece about individual growth and healing impacting the collective whole and vice versa. Yes. Great. Good stuff. I enjoyed your answers to those questions and our conversation. And I really can't encourage people enough to read your book? I know we've been promoting it on different pages that I follow. Whenever there's a question, I have a person or a client who I'm like, coercive,
Well, thank you.
coercive relationships, Jennifer C. Parker. So thanks again, Jennifer, for being a part of the podcast, and look forward to future conversations.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Take care.